Hey guys, it's Daniel, licensed therapist. Donald Trump. Great guy. The brilliant leader and savior of the free world, the best president since Abraham Lincoln, a literal angel. Or a narcissistic buffoon who is a sexist, racist, all the ists, a literal devil.
Donald J. Trump is now President of the United States. President Obama is the ex-president. And Mr. Trump, for the moment, steps.
That clip never gets old. Whether you love him or hate him, I feel like there are a couple things that are undeniable. He is maybe the most decisive man in the history of our world, and also he's a very, very unique personality. But what makes Donald Trump so unique in his personality? Well, let's get into it. Let's look under the hood and let's go where we always go, his childhood. But guys, if you like this kind of content, hit that like and subscribe button. Your guy would appreciate it. But where do we start, guys? Well, let's start with dear old dad. Let's get into it.
His father, Fred, was a millionaire real estate developer. The Trump patriarch has been described as a human machine, driven.
His father was, he was a demanding guy, and he did very much push Donald, and Donald in some ways was the chosen son.
Donald's father's overall message to his children was, and it was a very different message to the boys than to the girls. To the boys was compete, win, be a killer. Do what you have to win.
Well, no shocker here. Hard-nosed, hard-working real estate mogul father raises hard-nosed, hard-working real estate mogul son.
Nothing to see here.
And the emphasis on competition, I feel like, is very interesting because what that does is it creates this worldview where you start looking at people a certain way. People are either the opposition that you have to beat, or they're a tool to help you beat that opposition. And it's this ultra competitiveness that led him to have a lot of success in real estate. And then he had a lot of success in business. And then it led to this moment.
And I know just the guy to do it. Donald Trump is here tonight. Now, I know that he's taken some flack lately, but no one is happier, no one is prouder to put this birth certificate matter to rest than the Donald. And that's because he can finally get back to focusing on the issues that matter. Like, did we fake the moon landing? What really happened in Roswell? And where are Biggie and Tupac? All kidding aside, obviously we all know about your credentials and breadth of experience. For example, no, seriously, just recently in an episode of Celebrity Apprentice, at the steakhouse, the men's cooking team did not impress the judges from Omaha Steaks. And there was a lot of blame to go around, but you, Mr. Trump, recognized that the real problem was a lack of leadership. And so ultimately you didn't blame Little John or Meatloaf. You fired Gary Busey. And these are the kind of decisions that would keep me up at night.
President Obama will go down as perhaps the worst president in the history of the United States! Exclamation point at real Donald Trump. Well, at real Donald Trump, at least I will go down as a president.
So all you Trump haters out there, you have to give a little smidgen, a tiny bit of responsibility to Obama. But you know what? So far, this is a pretty typical story. We're not seeing the factors that make an outlier here. So let's dive a little deeper into Donald Trump and his dad.
Young Donald had his own crisis, finding his place in a family dominated by his father, Fred, a stern and demanding real estate developer.
I strongly suspect that he had a relationship with his father that accounts for a lot of what he became. And his father was a very brutal guy. He was a tough, hard, driving guy who had very, very little emotional intelligence, to use today's terms.
So there we have it, everybody. The emotionally unavailable father. The father who isn't able to show his child love. And, well, when it comes to rearing kids, love, I would say, is the most important thing. It is the central need of a child. But a common story out there is the man who has nothing, and because he has nothing, he works extremely hard and through grit and determination builds an empire. And he then has the availability to give his child everything that he didn't have. But because his child has everything, that child is soft and lacks that grit and determination, and then is unable to take over his dad's empire. And that is not the story of Donald Trump, but interestingly, that story does play out in Donald's older brother, Fred Jr. Let's take a look at Fred Jr.
Inside the family, a harsh game of apprentice. Who would take over Fred's empire? The first in line wasn't Donald. It was his older brother, Freddie.
My father was sensitive. He was kind and generous. He liked hanging out with his friends who adored him. And maybe worst of all, although it's hard to say, he had interest outside of the family business. My grandfather understood none of that.
Their father said Freddie wasn't a killer. He wanted to fly airplanes for a living. Donald thought that was crazy.
They could not understand why Fred did not go into the family business and be a builder like their father was. But Fred wanted to be a pilot, and Donald looked at that and said, well, that's sort of like being a bus driver. Why would you want to be a pilot?
Donald watched as Freddie was cast out.
My dad couldn't do anything right, and my grandfather made his life miserable. He was frustrated, and he began to realize that it wasn't going anywhere.
His life ended early in alcoholism and poor health.
You know, I actually look at Fred's desire to be a pilot and him almost defying his dad to do that as actually a good and healthy thing. He didn't succumb to the pressures of his dad or society. He didn't chase the money, the fame, the notoriety, the power, the acknowledgement. He just cared about what he cared about. And I think that that is actually a very self-actualized thing to do. He wasn't living for his father. He was living for himself and what was important to him. And I would say that if that was the end of the story, that's a pretty successful life. Unfortunately, the culture of the Trump family destroyed him. He became an alcoholic, and Donald actually saw that happening and never took a drink in his life. And I think we have to understand that Donald is 8 years younger than Fred Jr. So what happened was he had a front row seat to everything that happened to Fred Jr. in the family. He saw probably his dad belittle, berate, and probably bully Fred Jr. for his choice to be a pilot. And the story actually ends in tragedy, as it was just too much for Fred Jr. and he actually died of alcoholism. So this is a very stark contrast to Donald, but they were raised in the same house. What can account for two such different lives raised in the same household? Yes, there is a difference of Donald being able to watch what happened to Fred and probably learning from that situation. And I do feel like that does contribute to why they wound up so different. But I think there is another very powerful and I would say more influential factor that causes that difference. And that would be their mother.
But Donald Trump's childhood was much more complicated. Early on, a family crisis. His mother seriously ill.
When he was 2.5, my grandmother got very ill. Donald, who was at a very, very critical point in his development as a child, was essentially abandoned by her.
We need to keep in mind the context of the situation. Donald's mother had just given birth, and Donald at the time is 2 years old. So she had a hemorrhage and she had 4 surgeries, and it was reported that she was close to dying. So a mother with 5 children, one of them is a brand newborn and is close to dying. And if you think about that situation, do you think that Donald got the love, support, and attention that he needed and probably desired as a young child? I would guess that no, he didn't get that. So if we take into account his dad, who was emotionally unavailable, unable to show him love, and his mom, who was incapacitated, unable to show him love, we see a child who was starved for love and attention. And if you don't get love, you find it in some kind of way. You use whatever you can with whatever power you have, and you get it somehow. So if he wasn't able to get it from his mom, what did he do? He just tried to earn the approval of his dad. So what did he become? He became the killer, the competitor that his dad wanted. And I know some of you are thinking, Daniel, that's a little far-fetched. Maybe it is a little far-fetched, but one thing that leads me to believe that this is true is that children devoid of love typically act out. And well, that's what Donald did.
Biographer Michael D'Antonio says young Donald's thirst for attention often landed him in trouble at school.
He said to me that he was a wise guy. He's the fellow who threw an eraser and gave a teacher a black eye and would throw cake around a birthday party. So I can imagine him as being a little terror.
It proved even too much for Fred Trump to handle. So at age 13, Donald's parents shipped him upstate to the New York Military Academy.
Many kids, of course, are desperately homesick, can't wait to go home. He apparently loved military school. He liked the kind of out front, I think, competitiveness of it. There were so many different ways that you could excel and get medals and ribbons, cleanest rooms, shiniest shoes, all that kind of stuff.
Donald Trump thrived, rising in rank, and he was socially popular with men and women. He also gravitated towards sports, or rather, winning in sports, in soccer, wrestling, football, and baseball.
He excelled at baseball to the point where I think his coaches felt that he could become a professional baseball player. I think military school at least wrung some of his adolescent excesses out of him for a brief period of time. But the thing to remember about Donald Trump is that his wealth sort of created a bubble around him, and he's been able to pursue his appetites and really do whatever he wanted to do for most of his life with very few restraints.
So Donald goes to military school, and he's actually a very high performer. He does very well at multiple areas. Athletics, conforming to the military regimen and environment, things that are very high on the currency level of that age. It must have felt extremely good for him. So he got a lot of positive attention, whereas before he was doing a lot of negative attention seeking. He got a lot of love and acceptance, something that he was looking for in his childhood. And he found a lot of empowerment. He found that he was good at a lot of these things. And he actually rose to the top at what I would assume is a very tough environment.
And your journey towards the dark side will be complete.
So that's my take on Donald Trump. Do you disagree? You're probably wrong if you do, but I do leave the little possibility that I could be wrong. So if you disagree, leave it in the comments down there. And if you have anything you want me to react to, whether it's someone's childhood, if it's a scene in a movie or in a TV show, or if it's a news story, I would love to hear it. Leave all that in the comments down there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.